if the artificial intelligence has to use the algorithms in future to run the place, there was a feature about this on TV News last night. China's setting up a vast ranking system to monitor the behaviour of its huge populace and give everyone a social credit rating. It's kind of a reputation rating. So the way society views you and rewards you moves down if you drive badly, smoke in no smoking zones, post fake news online, do lots of things. And too much of that and they stop you flying or using public transport, or you'd have to sit in the cheap seats. 3 million people are reportedly already barred from buying business class train tickets. You have your internet speeds slowed, you miss out on good jobs, your children can't get into the best schools. And you also get rewarded if you're a nice person. Opinions on this, please.
Life is following art. I don't know if you watch a show called Black Mirror, but one of the episodes was about a future society where literally every reward you received socially depended on how well you were ranked by people. You know, the sort of Facebook-y type ranking. And this sounds like very much...
This is precisely that.
And unfortunately, this is the state determining. So I think it's 1984 writ very, very, very large. I think it's interesting in China that's gone through this period of creating freedom for people to then come back and have these rules and how you get out of them. You know, if you make a mistake. And I think one of the examples that was used was that somebody had travelled from one part of China to another and was not able to get back on a plane because the rules said that he was not allowed to get on a plane. That doesn't sound to me like a society that's on the positive way up.
However, having said that, if anyone can pioneer this kind of social capital trading system, I suppose China is best suited to it because of its state control of infrastructure and so much of the power.
Yeah.
The Chinese have, as a people, have survived all sorts of extraordinary social experiments over the last couple of thousand years.
True.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't put another one on them.
I wouldn't.
And a big one it is too. Yeah. The daredevil and stuntman Johnny Danger, a beloved online presence in New Zealand, killed in a motorcycle crash yesterday after taking part in an Anzac Day ride. More than 250,000 followers on Instagram and Facebook. He came to fame in that hair-raising ride across the Auckland Harbour Bridge on top of a taxi. And he had his own brand of Danger beer. And one tribute says, he sure as hell knew how to live life. Do you agree with that? Do we need more of this kind of iconoclasm and
Absolutely. I think they're a feature of New Zealand society. And, aroha atu ki te whānau, huge sympathy to the family. What a loss.
I thought it was interesting that it was said he was killed in a motorcycle crash after taking part in an organised Anzac Day ride.
Yeah.
And we haven't heard what actually happened.
No, we don't
It's
know.
hard to think how an organised Anzac Day ride would have turned into something like this. But, look, society is more interesting when people do take risks, and it's a shame. And he was a young man. And that's always bad. 2
motorbike fatalities in Auckland yesterday, and we'll talk tomorrow actually, because no time today now, about the increasing number of fatalities overseas on e-bikes.
Oh, I wish we'd done that today.
Why do you have one?
No, I don't, but I absolutely agree with it. But I'm kept being told by people that 60% of the population wants to ride a bike. If that was the case, where are the bike shops?
4 wheels are better than 2.
Ella Henry, John Barnett, thank you both.
Kia ora, thank you.
And we are back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight an exclusive interview with the outgoing chairman of the county's Manukau, DHB, who says the new health minister was briefed about the condition of buildings at Middlemore Hospital before concerns about asbestos and rot were made public. The outgoing chair says the minister and his advisor were also provided with a dossier of documents during a personal visit to the hospital on March 13. The government announces a $28 billion investment in Auckland transport over the next 10 years, but some Aucklanders will be forced to pay tolls on top of a regional fuel tax to help make it happen. Also tonight, the identity of the secret prison informant who was witness C in the Tamihere trial and lied can now be revealed. He was a double murderer and a known liar.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The opposition says the government is simply repackaging the transport projects National already had in progress for Auckland. Today, the government announced $28 billion for roads, rail and cycleways across the city over the next 10 years. The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, says it will help ease Auckland's awful congestion. But National's transport spokesperson Jamie Lee Ross says the main transport projects being funded were National's ideas, including the Penlink motorway and Mill Road upgrades. Mr Ross says it's the way the government is funding the projects that really grates.
When it comes to the Penlink area, they want Rodney people to pay a regional fuel tax, increase national fuel taxes, and they want to put a toll on top of it for Penlink. So those people are being whacked 3 times for that particular road. But that's the Labour Party for you.
Jamie Lee Ross says under National, the projects would have been fully funded with its $32 billion infrastructure fund. 2 steel mesh companies have together been fined $400,000 for misleading customers about their seismic steel mesh used in building foundations. NZ Steel Distributor Limited imported the steel from China and its related company Timber King sold it. They forged a test certificate to claim the steel had been independently tested and complied with standards for structural use in an earthquake zone. In his ruling, the Auckland District Court Judge Robert Renane says the steps taken by the companies to provide a false assurance to customers were grossly negligent. Christchurch ratepayers might have to fork out more than $20 million to make the city's water supply safe. In January, the City Council revealed most of the city's 156 wells were at risk of contamination and temporary chlorination was essential. This month, staff had recommended raising 81 wells above ground and reviewing another 16. The council has voted to do the work, which will cost at least $21.5 million. A councillor, Mike Davidson, says the goal is to make the wells safe enough to remove the chlorine.
Our water supply, our drinking water supply, that needs to be gold-plated. You know, it comes before a covered stadium, it comes before repaired roads, it comes before cycleways. It is one of our best assets the city has.
Christchurch councillor Mike Davidson. The identity of a secret prison informant who gave evidence at David Tamihere's 1990 murder trial can now be revealed. Double murderer Roberto Conchi Harris, until now known only as Witness C, was last year convicted for lying to the jury in the Tamihere case. Sarah Robson has more.
Roberto Harris was found guilty of 8 charges of perjury after a private prosecution by the self-styled jailhouse lawyer Arthur Taylor. He was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, but various appeals mean his name suppression has only lapsed now. Harris told David Tamihere's 1990 trial that Tamihere had made a number of confessions to him, including that he sexually abused the Swedish tourists Heidi Parkinen and Sven Hoglund and dumped their bodies at sea. Harris later recanted his evidence. Mr Hoglund's body was later found in a shallow grave on the Coromandel Peninsula. Ms Parkinen has never been found. Harris is serving a life sentence for the 1983 murders of Northland couple Trevor Martin Crossley and Carol Ann Pye. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The outgoing chairman of the county's Manukau District Health Board says the new health minister was informed about the condition of buildings at Middlemore Hospital before concerns about rot, dampness and weather tightness and asbestos were made public. Rabin Rabindran, who became acting chair in December, says the minister David Clark visited Middlemore last month and was given a dossier of information including a list of buildings and their problems. Mr Rabindran told Checkpoint that on one document, 6 buildings are described as being of high concern. Both David Clark and the previous minister have repeatedly said they were unaware of the extent of the problems at Middlemore. Poverty and ethnicity have been found to be driving factors behind child deaths in the country. A report from the Child and Youth Mortality Review Committee says children from the poorest areas are 3 times more likely to die than those in the wealthiest. The report also found Māori and Pacific children are more likely to die than children from other ethnic backgrounds. The committee's chair, Felicity Dumble, says there are a number of contributing factors.
The reasons for this high rate among those living in the poorer areas is got lots of features to it, including their housing. Is it crowded? Is it damp with mould? Have they got good access to a healthy diet and access to health services?
Dr Dumble says suicides among young people are also of great concern, with more than 1,700 deaths of 10 to 14-year-olds recorded between 2002 and 2016. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the Hurricanes captain Brad Shields will turn down the All Blacks if they come calling for the 3-test series against France in June. Shields, who's moving to English club Wasps at the end of the Super Rugby season, is awaiting a release from New Zealand Rugby so he can play for England on their tour of South Africa. Shields was approached to play for the All Blacks last year but turned them down. And despite the All Blacks again suffering a mounting loose forward injury toll, he says he won't be changing his mind should coach Steve Hansen call again.
That was the opportunity that presented itself in last year, and at my point in time, look, I needed to try something new, and that's just the way the road's sort of gone for me, and I'm pretty happy with where it's heading, and yeah, that's sort of my decision. That what I had to come across a few months ago when I signed over in England, that was obviously part of the plan.
Brad Shields. The New Zealand basketballer Stephen Adams and his Oklahoma City Thunder side recovered from a 25-point third-quarter deficit to keep alive their NBA playoff hopes with a 107-99 win over the Utah Jazz. The turnaround was led by Russell Westbrook, who scored 45 points. Utah lead the best-of-7 first-round series 3-2. The Olympic silver medalist Alex Maloney and Molly Meach are the best performed of the New Zealand sailors at the latest World Cup regatta in the south of France. On the second day of racing, the Olympic silver medalist posted 2 wins from 3 races in the 49er FX class to move up to second overall. That's the news.
New roads, but how soon? They're going to happen within the next 10 years. But we'll get cracking on them straight away, and I would hope before very long we'll be able to give people some definite timeframes. New homes can't come soon enough.
We're getting new arrivals in Auckland every day, so our homeless community are going to be bigger than ever before.
And a minister wants a clearer passage.
There are just so many impediments in the way, so that's the first strain, in my view, that needs a political laxative.
Keeping you regular, morning reports every weekday from 6. Then on 9 to noon, how New Zealand can transition to a low-emissions economy, the Productivity Commission's roadmap. And after 10, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Amy Goldstein on her new book documenting the impact of the global financial crisis on the small town of Janesville, Wisconsin. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather, this is through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Mainly fine, but a few light showers tomorrow. Aitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Mostly fine, but isolated showers about Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington tomorrow. Big Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson, fine weather. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine today. A few showers tomorrow, turning to rain later in the day. Canterbury, fine today. Scattered rain developing south of Christchurch tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today. Scattered rain developing tomorrow morning, turning to showers, possibly heavy and thundery with hail from evening. Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's 5:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thanks everyone for being with us. Coming up on the program tonight, $28 billion over a decade to sort out transport in our largest city. We have the details on what's being spent and where. Sally Murphy was at the launch. We hear from the Minister, the Mayor, the Opposition and the AA. And Zach Fleming has crossed the bridge for reaction. That is coming up and much more too. But we're going to begin tonight with a Checkpoint exclusive, an interview with the outgoing chair of the board at the county's Manukau DHB, who said documents were provided to the new health minister detailing problems with buildings at Middlemore before the issues there became public. When news broke of problems with buildings at the hospital, both the previous health minister, Jonathan Coleman, and the current minister, David Clark, said they didn't know the extent of the issue. Who knew what and when is still in dispute, and Checkpoint is working on a major investigation of this across the health sector. But addressing desperate requirements for capital expenditure at some DHBs requires the Minister to know how bad the problem is. Of course, Jonathan Coleman said he didn't know. David Clark has said he's only recently learnt the extent of it. Now, Rabin Rabindran was present during a ministerial visit to Middlemore in which buildings were discussed and documents were provided to the Minister listing their problems.
It was not a thick stack of documents. It was about 25 pages, together with maybe 14 or 15 pages of PowerPoint. But there is just one page which sets out the which buildings have got asbestos, which buildings have got seismic, and which buildings have got weather tightness, and which are the buildings which are considered critical infrastructure. And there are ticks against each of those buildings as to which column they fall into. And there are several buildings where they have all of these issues. So if anyone looked at that, they would have realized that there are other buildings with these same problems.
Yes, those buildings are all named. I have what looks to me to be the most significant of the documents that were reportedly part of that folder dossier or whatever provided to the Minister. This is the Consolidated Building Issue Matrix and Assessment Timeline, September 2017. And it names Galbraith, Esme Green Colvin, Manukau Superclinic, Manukau Surgery Centre and Otara Spinal Rehab as having issues with both asbestos and water tightness and of being high concern buildings. You're saying that document was provided to the Minister when he came to the meeting at Middlemore on March 13th?
In fact, a hard copy of the document was presented, one to the Minister and one to his advisor. And if they had a look at it, they would have known. But that is not the only time that this information would have been put out. There is something called the Statement of Performance Expectation. It is a document that is freely available. It's on the website. And if anyone looks at that document, on page 21 of it, there's a clear statement there that Kids First Building needs recladding, about $12 million. Mackinder Building needs recladding, $8 million. Manukau Building needs recladding, $11 million. So that's $31 million just for recladding. Now, this was the Statement of Performance Expectation was sent to the Minister in November last year. It was signed by both Lester Levy as chair and me as deputy chair. So, and this has been presented to Parliament. So it is a public document that shows what's and anyone looking at it will think, well, if it has all of these cladding issues, surely it must be pretty serious.
Yes, but we still have the ministers, this minister, the new minister, David Clark, and the previous minister, Jonathan Coleman, saying they didn't know. Is it conceivable, at least in broad brush terms, that they didn't know the problems with multiple buildings in the Middlemore campus?
Well, if they had read the papers that were presented, they would have come to know how bad it was. What we as a board did under this current board was to pull together all of the construction issues, because it was really concerning us that there were so many buildings that were in a really bad state. Now, we put it all together and we presented it to the Capital Investment Committee. And that was done in December last year. And I recall in mid-December, we got a letter from the chairman of the Capital Investment Committee to say that they have received all of these documents and they are supporting the progression of two of the programs to the next stage, which is the program business case. And we were congratulated for securing that endorsement. So the Capital Investment Committee is a body that reports to the minister, and its role is to provide independent advice to the ministers of both health and finance, as well as to the Director General of Health. So how this has not got to the ministers in sufficient detail, or at least in enough detail to show, wow, we've got buildings in really bad shape, really concerns me.
How didn't it happen? Either the ministers knew, or someone was running interference on material like the stuff I've got in front of me, not telling the ministers the bad news. Was someone running interference?
I don't know whether there was someone who has kept the material. I wouldn't have thought so. But I guess there's a need for us in New Zealand to stop putting a political lens on health. Health is too important an aspect to have just a political look at it. It has to be done. When you think Counties Manukau is a good example, and we are growing annually by about 2%, which is about 10,000 plus people every year, and there is about 4 to 5% of people in Counties Manukau who are over 65 years of age, and a third of our local population lives in New Zealand's what I would describe as most socio-economically deprived areas. And that we are talking about, in our estimate, about 196,000 people, adults and children, in Counties Manukau. And sadly, it is the representation of Maori and Pacific people is overrepresented in these figures. And they have a range of complex health conditions that limits both the length and quality of their lives. So how can you close your eyes and only look at it from a political point of view to dealing with health? And I think it is successive governments that have failed to address this problem.
Yes, and that in a way is critical. Given population pressures, the pressures on DHBs to remain in surplus, and we've certainly documented those on Checkpoint over the past year or two, given the squeeze on vote health, is CapEx, like Middlemore's buildings, being quietly shoved to one side, being ignored by someone? Is someone somewhere in the ministry, in the treasury, on DHB boards somewhere, bottling the bad news and setting it aside? Are we in a way being misled?
I don't think that there is an intention to mislead. What I would think is that they probably have not been properly advised because a whole lot of people have been involved in this whole process, as funding takes quite a lot of time. The Capital Investment Committee, Treasury, the Ministry of Health, the person who is the relationship manager, all of them would have knowledge, more than just knowledge, would have quite detailed knowledge of what it's about.
But the ministers, both ministers, Coleman and Clark, say they didn't know, not in a detailed sense. I want to come back to what the minister was told. Over the past few days, I've seen multiple reports, more than one, 2 or 3, I think, in which the minister is quoted as saying you apologised to him for not giving him the full picture about the buildings at Middlemore at that March 13 meeting. Can you explain this? What did you apologise for? After the March 13 meeting, what happened?
Well, maybe I should explain what happened. Now, it was during the visit that the minister made and his advisor made to Middlemore. I won't go now into what happened in that visit, but there appears to have been a misunderstanding by the minister about the phone call that he made to me in Australia. I was in Australia on the 22nd of March with clients, and he phoned me and said he was rather upset that he was not informed about the other buildings at the Middlemore campus, and he reminded me of my obligations under the no surprises policy. I told him I'm very familiar with that policy, and in fact, to me, it is paramount. And I believe that we had always adhered to the policy. And I said, I'm sorry, Minister, if you feel we have not complied with the no surprises policy. Where I was concerned, I really didn't know at that time what is it he didn't know. As I knew that we had provided a lot of information about the buildings, but I said I'll check with the acting chief executive, Dr. Gloria Johnson, and get back to him. It was only when I called Dr. Gloria Johnson that I came to know that what the minister was saying was that he was not told about the other buildings during his visit. I texted him back that night from Australia with confirmation about the documentation that was provided to him on his visit to the hospital on the 13th, and the clear recollection by Dr. Gloria Johnson of what she told him. And one of the general managers who showed the minister the photographs of the dire state of the buildings, including photographs showing the moisture content of 97.9%, there were photographs there that were not limited to the Scots building. There was one of the Manukau Super Clinic, which showed active fungal growth. In fact, the minister, when he looked at those photographs, he said, well, he has seen worse. So I was pretty disappointed when a month later, on the 16th of April, he was being quoted that I apologized that he wasn't told about the other buildings. I was not apologizing for that. I was apologizing if he thought that we had breached the no surprises policy. And further, there's been so much of information given to the Ministry of Health, the Treasury, the Capital Investment Committee, the relationship person at the ministry, and directly to the minister and his advisors. So it was quite upsetting to hear him say that my apology was because we hadn't discussed the issues with the other buildings.
Robin Rabindran, outgoing chair of the county's Manukau DHB. We are going to look over the next week or two at the advice the ministry is receiving from DHBs and what it is passing on to its ministers. That's coming up on Checkpoint. The Health Minister, Dr. David Clark, declined to be interviewed, but a short time ago he released a statement. In it he says, and I quote at some length, "I'm not going to respond to the ongoing selective leaking of information coming out of the county's Manukau DHB. The most important issue here is the state the public health service has been left in after 9 years of neglect, which we are working to fix. That said, I have a very clear memory of what I was told during my visit to the county's Manukau DHB on March 13th. I was told about the Scott building, but other specific buildings were not discussed. During the visit, I was handed a background document, which I subsequently read. It covered a wide range of issues, including clinical matters, demand for services, finances and facilities. It contained some additional information about buildings that required remediation due to years of underfunding and neglect, but nowhere did it mention either mould or rot. My recollections of my discussions with Robin Rabindran are also crystal clear. I made clear to him my disappointment that other building issues were not raised with me face to face during the March 13 visit, and he apologised for that. Announcements on DHB appointments will be made in due course." End of statement from Health Minister David Clark. It's 24 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. We turn now to what the government's calling New Zealand's largest ever civil construction program to create a 21st century transport network. The cost will be $28 billion over the next decade, some of it funded from the Auckland fuel tax. Auckland will also receive 38% of the National Land Transport Fund over the next decade, which the government points out is equal to the percentage of New Zealanders who live in the Auckland region. What's the money buying? Well, new major link roads, new light rail and a walk and cycleway on around the Harbour Bridge. And there's more. National says much of it isn't actually new. The government has simply repackaged its ideas. Let's look at it. Sally Murphy was at today's launch.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says the projects should go a long way towards easing congestion on the roads, but will also provide options for people to change the way that they travel.
This package is transformational in heavy rail with a third main trunk line that will allow an express route from the south into the city. I travelled on that line yesterday, and at 6:30 in the morning those carriages were full in peak hour. It allows for electrification to Pukekohe. It allows for new electric trains.
The $28 billion 10-year package includes improving bus services, a better bus service to the airport, and more buses operating in the central city. $213 million has been set aside for 15 new electric trains, and there's a $28 million spruce up of the downtown ferry terminal. Safety is also highlighted, with $225 million going towards upgrades such as red light cameras, improving high-risk intersections and roadside barriers. Over $200 million will go into eastern busways, which would link Panmure and Botany. The plan is being funded with the help of the Auckland regional fuel tax of 10 cents plus GST a litre, directly raising $1.5 billion over the next decade, which opens up extra funding of $4.3 billion in total. But the council is yet to actually vote on the regional fuel tax, so the plan could end up with a $4 billion hole. Mayor Phil Goff says that is unlikely to happen.
Because I'm confident that councillors will say, what are the options that we've got? We could do nothing, and in which case our city would become gridlocked, not really an option. We could put it all on rates, but that would mean a 13% increase in rates, and it would be totally unfair because many people don't travel a lot in our public transport system, particularly our retired folk, and they would effectively be subsidising the big companies that use our transport systems all the time.
Transport Minister Phil Twyford says with the help of the Auckland fuel tax, the $28 billion package is fully funded.
We inherited from the past government a $9.7 billion fiscal hole in Auckland's transport plan for the next 10 years. It was widely reported at the time as a $5.9 billion hole, but all of the calculations and the modelling had failed to inflation-proof that program of spending for the 10-year period. We've done the numbers. There was a $9.7 billion hole, and we've closed it.
Mr Twyford says the plan is a win-win for Auckland, but was keen to emphasise the city is not getting more than its fair share of funding.
I've made it very clear to the New Zealand Transport Agency that Auckland will get a fair share of the National Land Transport Program that it funds through road taxes and road user charges, but it will only get a fair share. And the modelling that this program is based on shows that Auckland will receive 38% of the expenditure under the National Land Transport Program over the next 10 years.
One main project is a $500 million upgrade to Mill Road in South Auckland to take pressure off the southern motorway between Manukau and Drury. Another is a new connection between the Whangaparoa Peninsula and Northern Motorway called Penlink, which will cost $200 million. Penlink will be built as a public-private partnership and will be a toll road. Phil Twyford says the toll is likely to be between $2 and $3 each way. The National Party's transport spokesperson Jamie Lee Ross says the government is simply repackaging what the former government already had in train, and the Penlink and Mill Road projects were National's ideas. But he says it's the way the government is funding the project that really grates.
When it comes to the Penlink area, they want Rodney people to pay a regional fuel tax, increase national fuel taxes, and they want to put a toll on top of it for Penlink. So those people are being whacked 3 times for that particular road, but that's the Labour Party for you.
The AA has welcomed the plan and its clear focus on road safety, but its spokesman Barney Irvine says there's no detail on how congestion will be affected.
But the big question for us is congestion and what impact this plan is going to have on congestion. Congestion is the number one concern for our members, and the plan in its current form tells us very little about congestion outcomes.
Mr Irvine says alongside the plan, the AA would like to see a more focused conversation around congestion open charging. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
We'll have more on this later from Zach Fleming, who's gone over to the North Shore. Terry Twynham has texted in saying, if you do get $28 billion and your traffic problems resolved, can we stop hearing about them? Yes, you can, Terry, but it's 10 years away, bless you. After years of investigations into a string of cold case rapes and murders, the police in California say they may finally have found their needle in the haystack, and he was one of their own. They've arrested 72-year-old former police officer Joseph D'Angelo, who was living in Sacramento. He's being held on 2 counts of murder, but the police believe he could be responsible for more than 50 rapes and 12 killings in different parts of California during the 1970s and 80s. This report in from Reuters.
The answer has always been in Sacramento.
After an exhaustive investigation spanning 4 decades, California authorities announced the arrest of a suspect believed to be the so-called Golden State Killer.
And yesterday afternoon, in a perfectly executed arrest, my detectives arrested James Joseph D'Angelo, 72 years old, living in Citrus Heights.
The elusive masked killer was also known as the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Diamond Knot Killer. He is suspected of murdering 12 people, raping 45 others, and breaking into over 100 homes.
His 12-year reign of terror lasted from 1974 through May 4th of 1986.
The arrest comes after police matched discarded DNA evidence from the suspect's Sacramento home with forensic evidence from the crimes.
As part of this team, that we were looking for a needle in a haystack, but we also all knew that the needle was there.
D'Angelo has been charged with capital murder and other counts in connection with the 1980 slayings of Lyman and Charlene Smith.
This 1980 murder has long been a source of fear and angst in the neighborhood in which it occurred, in the community, and indeed throughout all of Ventura County.
His alleged victims ranged in age from 13 to 41 and included women alone at home with their children or their spouse. According to published reports, D'Angelo was fired from the Auburn Police Department in 1979 after he allegedly stole a hammer and a can of dog repellent. The case was back in the spotlight earlier this year after a book on the Golden State Killer was published. I'll Be Gone in the Dark was written by the late Michelle McNamara, a crime journalist. The book was completed after her death by a researcher recruited by her husband, comedian Patton Oswalt. On Wednesday, Oswalt tweeted, "I think you got him, Michelle."
That report just in from Reuters. It's 27.5 to 6. Coming up on Checkpoint, the identity of a secret prison informant who gave false evidence at David Tamihere's murder trial can now be revealed. He was double murderer Roberto Conchi Harris. We speak to David Tamihere's lawyer about this. An Auckland taxi company says it wasn't provided with enough information to help find an elderly man with dementia, and it shut suddenly a fortnight ago. But should the Southern Museum and Art Gallery have been closed at all? We're going to hear from someone who says absolutely not. We'd love your feedback. Text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can email us in. Lots of stuff coming in on the health system, including some whistleblowing from the inside. We appreciate it. We'll be in touch with you. Business next, but first Katrina with the headlines.
The opposition says the government is simply repackaging National's plans with today's announcement of the Auckland Transport Alignment Project. The government has announced $28 billion for roads, rail and cycleways across the city over the next 10 years. National's transport spokesperson Jamie Lee Ross says the main projects being funded were National's ideas. The identity of a secret prison informant who gave evidence at David Tamihere's 1990 murder trial can now be revealed. Roberto Conchi Harris, who was known only as Witness C, was last year convicted for lying to the jury in the Tamihere case. He was last year found guilty of 8 counts of perjury after a successful private prosecution by the jailhouse lawyer Arthur Taylor. Harris was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison at the time, and his name suppression has now lapsed. The outgoing chair of the county's Manukau DHB says the new health minister was told of high concern about 6 buildings at Middlemore Hospital before the publication of concerns about rot, mould and asbestos in some buildings. Rabin Rabindran told Checkpoint the minister was sent a statement of performance expectations in November last year, which contained information about cladding problems. He says when David Clark visited Middlemore last month, he was given a dossier of information which included a list of buildings and their problems. Thousands of Vector customers had their personal information accessed last week during Auckland's power outages. A vulnerability on the company's app for reporting power cuts meant the names, phone numbers and email addresses of its customers were accessible. Christchurch ratepayers may have to pay more than $20 million to make the city's water supply safe. Earlier this year, the City Council revealed a contamination risk at most of the city's 156 wells, forcing it to put chlorine in the water. This month, staff have recommended raising 81 wells above ground and reviewing another 16. The council has voted to do the work, which will cost at least $21.5 million. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Excellent, which isn't very far away. I'd say the time, but it's so close that we don't want to tempt it. Right. Yep. It's mumble to 6. Let's turn to business news now with Emile Donovan, who is beaming in from Wellington. There you are, beaming, Emile. A takeover bid for Tegel Chicken is on the horizon. This is a fascinating story, Emile.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So we're talking about a Filipino company, John, called Bounty Fresh. And this morning it revealed it has agreed to take 45% of Tegel's shares off the hands of its majority shareholder, that's Claris Investment. And it's going to launch a full takeover bid in the next 30 days. So, look, first of all, a bit about Bounty Fresh. It's a farm-to-market company, so it controls all aspects of, breeding and raising chickens and the processing, the distribution and so on. It has revenues of about $750 million a year, and it reckons its infrastructure will allow it to take Tegel's international. The company also says it's happy to settle for less than full control and work with minority shareholders. The news for those shareholders is that Bounty Fresh is offering $1.23 a share, which is a 50% premium on what the shares were trading at close yesterday. And Tegel could also pay its shareholders a dividend, a previously agreed dividend of about 4 cents per share without adjusting that draft price. Now, that being said, the offer is way below the original float value of Tegel. Yeah, you remember a couple of years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago actually, Tegel shares went on sale at $1.55 per share. And the share price has just plummeted since then for a variety of reasons that we don't need to go into right now. But Tegel's is basically saying, they're not saying much, but they're saying this was an unsolicited offer, and it is subject to some conditions being met, such as Bounty getting more than 50% of the listed shares and Tegel meeting some earnings targets over the next 6 months. And Tegel is basically telling its shareholders to get professional advice before making a call on this. It must be said, though, that Tegel's stock has shot up today.
Right, so above, so the offer price is $1.23. It's gone above that, has it, Emile?
Not quite.
Right.
It's got, but it has gone up by a lot, 36%.
Right,
so it closed at about $1.12 by the end of the day. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. I suspect Tegel are getting legal advice themselves, right, as well as advising their shareholders to do the same thing. Thanks, Emile. Obviously, you'll keep us updated on this. Auckland Airport got a bit of a rap over the knuckles from the Commerce Commission.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a draft report from the Commerce Commission into the airline, or rather the airport's forecast profits for the next 5 years. Basically, it's concluded that they are too high, the forecast profits, and that is not in customers' best interests. It reckons people will be overcharged by about 61 cents per customer per flight, which doesn't sound a lot in isolation, but in the end that would net the airport, about $47 million, which, that's no
nice work if you can get it, Emile.
Now, the airport, unsurprisingly, is not too thrilled with that summary of events. It's saying that really that extra cash is justified given the amount that it's going to have to invest in infrastructure over the next few years. And look, the Commission is sympathetic to that. It's taken a lot of those notes on board. But you know who's not sympathetic, John? The airlines. They reckon they're basically being used as a piggy bank, kind of being shaken down to pay for infrastructure that hasn't even been built yet. Now, as I said before, this is a draft report and the ComCom is inviting submissions before issuing a final one. So it will be interesting to see whether the airport can sway their minds in the meantime.
Nice tension bubbles to the surface between the airlines and the airport from time to time, doesn't it?
It's fun.
It's fascinating. So where else can they go? There's just the one airport in Auckland. Hey, what happened on the markets?
Well, the NZX Top 50, it's down by a hair's breadth, 6.8 points, so that's 0.08 of 1%. It ended on 8282, and the dollar's also down very slightly. It's buying 70.06 US cents, 93.2 Australian and 50.6 pence.
Emil Donovan, thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 20 to 6. The identity of a secret prison informant who gave false evidence, perjury, at David Tamihere's murder trial has finally been revealed. Tamihere was convicted in 1990 for the murders of Swedish tourists Heidi Parkkinen and Urban Höglund. Heidi Parkkinen's body has never been found. Urban Höglund was later found wearing a watch the jury had been told Tamihere had stolen from him. Double murderer Roberto Conchi Harris, until now known as Witness C, only as Witness C, was last year convicted for lying to the jury in this case. He was one of 3 prison inmates who testified against Tamihere at his trial, telling the jury Tamihere had confessed to killing the backpackers. It can now be revealed Harris murdered whangarei couple Trevor Crossley and Carol Pye in 1983. The couple's bodies were discovered by Pye's 3 children, all aged under 10 when they got home from school. David Tamihere's lawyer is Murray Gibson. Obviously, he's known the identity of secret witness C. A short time ago, I asked him his assessment of the impact of Harris's evidence, testimony, which was perjury, of course, against David Tamihere.
Well, David said to me that after Mr. Harris had given evidence against him, he said that he lost all hope. He could see that the jury were totally persuaded by what Harris told them in evidence. And of course, that jury didn't know that Harris was convicted of a double murder himself. Not so much a murder as an execution, quite frankly, of a man and his wife. And then Harris tried to shift the blame onto a cousin of his that was present with him. And, you know, that's the quality of the evidence that the jury heard and were persuaded by. And, of course, there were 2 other witnesses, but they all gave such contradictory evidence. But, you know, the jury, I presume, assumes that these inmates just do nothing else than stand around in the courtyard discussing their cases, which is actually far from the truth. And David's a very private man, and he never discussed his case with anyone.
I remember Witness C. It seemed to me that of the secret witnesses, his was the testimony that had the most weight. So he was a double murderer. What you're also telling us is that he lied to try and blame someone else for that double murder?
For his own actions and the double murder, he blamed someone else, and fortunately the lawyer acting for the other person got severance, which means had a separate trial from Conchi Harris. And when Harris got convicted, he at least at that stage did the decent thing and acknowledged that the other person wasn't involved. But he'd taken him right up to the door of the court, and the other bloke's trial was only a few weeks away before Harris finally acknowledged what he did. And the thing about Harris when he gave his evidence, it was the manner in which he weaved all the strands of evidence from other witnesses together that was really most persuasive. I mean, he not only purported to say what David told him, but you know, and all those tales that were being told were giving great support to other witnesses whose evidence may not have been accepted without the confirmation from Harris.
So not only did he lie about David Tamihere and what he had said, not only, and we know this now, was he a double murderer who'd lied about someone else who has been convicted of perjury and all of that, he was also capable of weaving together information that was already in the public domain to make that more credible.
Well, these guys, unfortunately, are such practiced liars that they come over as being quite persuasive when they're given their evidence in court. And And it's really only since the conviction of Harris now that his name has become public property and as all his earlier offending, which of course was concealed from the jury when he gave his evidence against David 28 years ago. So, you know, the true value of the person given evidence isn't necessarily communicated to the jury, and they just have to rely on a person that's got a lot to gain, which the officer in charge fronted the parole board for Harris and promoted his early release, and all for perjured evidence.
Right, so the jury relied on that, and we know it was perjured evidence from a man who really could not be relied upon. The jury relied on the watch, which of course was found on the body. What else did the jury rely on that was really significant that has subsequently been found to have not been true?
The balance of the evidence really was that was proved to be fatally wrong was that the Trampers claimed that it was David Tamihere they saw in the clearing and that he was in the company of Heidi. In fact, the young man, Urban Hogland, his remains were found 37 kilometres away from where the Trampers claimed they saw Heidi, and that the Crown advanced the story that Urban at this time was tied to a tree in the near vicinity, and that Heidi was too terrified to say anything to the Trampers when they confronted this person that they claim was David. So David was supposed to have committed this offence in an isolated area and then somehow transported the young boy and presumably Heidi 37 kilometres away from where Urban's remains were located. So really it called into question the Trampers' evidence, but of course witness C gave very persuasive evidence that supported their version of events and that David was allegedly told them. So it's a very tangled web, I'm afraid, but it's on the day it was very persuasive and led to David's false convictions, really.
What needs to happen now?
Well, there's two avenues, really. One is to appeal to the Governor-General to exercise a prerogative of mercy. Really, the Governor-General is acting on behalf of the Queen. But in fact, the Ministry looks at it and then decides whether it shouldn't be referred back to the Court of Appeal for re-argument. Or alternatively, you know, we place some hope on the Labor government's indications that they're going to set up a commission to look at a number of these questionable convictions. And maybe we need to be first in the queue for that to be heard there.
That's Murray Gibson, David Tamihere's lawyer. New Zealand First Cabinet Minister Shane Jones has set the cat amongst the public service pigeons with his claims the bureaucracy is too sluggish and it needs to move faster. Mr Jones wants his party to campaign on making changes at the next election, but National says the minister just wants to avoid scrutiny of his decision-making on things like the Regional Development Fund. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
First it was Air New Zealand, now it's the public service and Shane Jones' sights. Whilst acknowledging he has no control over the state sector, he says in his role as Regional Development Minister he's been astounded at how long it takes for urgent projects to be rolled out in the regions. He blames the bureaucracy and says it needs a political laxative.
There's scope to look for different options as to how I as a politician can be more effective by tweaking the bureaucracy.
Shane Jones wants to pitch ideas for change to the New Zealand First conference later in the year, which he hopes will become party policy. He gives the Australian system as an example.
The Aussie model is nowhere as dramatic as Mr Trump hiring his son-in-law. The Aussie model, where I was last year, enables a small group of CEOs at the apex of the bureaucracy to be replaced after an election.
But the Public Service Association's National Secretary Glenn Barclay says if ministers could appoint their own people, it would be counterproductive.
You just end up getting the advice that you want. And it's really important that with any new policies, particularly substantial policies, that they are open to scrutiny.
National's Regional Development spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says what Shane Jones classifies as obstructive is simply the public service doing its job.
The bureaucracy asks
these impertinent questions like, what are we actually getting for the money? And basic due process. And so what we're seeing is a minister who's keen to shovel $3 billion out the door as quickly as possible for his political purposes and doesn't like to be held back with the niceties of checking out that the people who are receiving the money are actually going to do what they say they're going to do.
Mr Goldsmith, who was a minister in the previous government, says of course bureaucracy can be frustrating, as you always want everything done the day after tomorrow. But he says one of New Zealand's most precious assets is its independent and neutral civil service.
And we don't want to undermine it by ministers who just want to spend large sums of money as quickly as possible with as few restraints as possible. That's what he is suggesting, and over time that would have a very negative impact on New Zealand and the way that we do our politics.
In a statement, the State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes says it isn't appropriate for any public servant, including himself, to engage in public debate with ministers about policy issues. But pushed further by RNZ, he said every public servant gets out of bed in the morning and comes to work, wanting to do the very best they can for New Zealanders. Mr Hughes said he was proud of his public servants and the work they do. Atu I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramalaho.
10 to 6, an Auckland taxi company says it wasn't provided with enough information to help find an elderly man with dementia. 75-year-old William Knight was accompanying his wife to an appointment at Green Lane Hospital last month when he became distressed and disappeared. It took 15 hours to find him again, and his family say despite bank details showing he'd taken a co-op taxi, they weren't given enough help to track where he'd been dropped off. Tom Furley has more.
It was the first time William Knight has walked off, leading to an increasingly anxious search for him across town late last month. His daughter, Nicole Knight, says his dementia has been developing over the past year, and they had grave concerns for his safety. The police swarmed the area near Green Lane Hospital around midday on March 28th to help find him, and soon after found their first lead.
It was only about, I think, half an hour later when they saw only one transaction. It was for Auckland Taxi Co-op, and we had the fare and the time. And that was after being missing for about an hour. So they then contacted the taxi company straight away. This was because they searched around for a while and couldn't locate him. But given now that he had possibly hopped in a taxi, that would have explained that.
Ms Knight says the company was called, but the driver couldn't be found, leaving searchers looking for a needle in a haystack.
The long and short of it, they really failed us. Apparently 3 drivers were identified as possible, having picked him up. 2, I think, they ruled out because it was a Three Kings area, and there was 1 who hadn't come forward. So they obviously put this sort of word out trying to track down the driver, because if we knew the area he'd been dropped off, we'd obviously be able to have a better search area.
After 7 hours of searching, she called the taxi company again to urge them to help, but was told someone who could help track the ride using bank transaction details had gone for the day.
In exceptional times, sometimes you have to go the extra mile, and you need that, and we hear of Good Samaritans and people doing the right thing, but it wasn't even a matter of that. It was just a little bit more effort for something more exceptional. It wasn't like an everyday matter. Police were involved and family. There were grave concerns, and I don't think it was unfair to us. That's the time when you recognise that you need to do a bit more than you normally would.
She says they feared the worst going into night time, but fortunately her father was found safe at 2 a.m. wandering in Ponsonby, 15 hours after disappearing. Ms Knight, after placing a complaint with the company, says a manager was able to find the details of her father's taxi trip using the bank transaction. The head of the Taxi Federation, John Hart, while declining to comment on the case specifically, says companies should be able to track a taxi within minutes if they have the right details.
The information is readily available for their operators to access. As long as they've got information to put into the system, it's pretty easy for them to get information out. But it does depend on having that correct information at the start.
Co-op Taxi's operations manager Sean Williams says the company takes these situations very seriously, and if correct information is provided, they can locate the trip with ease. He says drivers with trips from Green Lane Hospital were called individually, and even though one driver couldn't be reached, none of them would have helped as they were focused on the wrong pickup spot provided by the police. The trip's origins were later found to be around the corner from the hospital on Monaco Road. They say phone calls from the police were very vague, with minimal information. However, it says the incident is under review and will inform processes and training. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Let's go to Southland, where an architect says the museum and art gallery should never have been closed down. The building was closed, as we know, indefinitely 2 weeks ago after the Trust Board and Invercargill Council deemed it an earthquake risk. A peer review of a 2013 seismic assessment said the buildings were less than 34% of the new building standard. But Invercargill architect Bob Simpson says this isn't right. He's just had a meeting with the Southland Museum and Art Galleries Trust and the council's CEO to explain why. And Bob joins us live now. Are you there, Bob?
I am, John.
You're hot out of the meeting?
Well, yes.
Yeah, good. What did you tell him? What did you say?
Well, I had the advantage. I had a similar meeting last week with the council. This time it was with the Museum Trust Board, but this time I had structural engineer Lou Robinson from Dunedin on the conference call, and so he was able to support the contention which I'd made, which is basically that the report from 2013 made two assumptions which we believe are incorrect. One is that they put it in the wrong category of ground, and we've done a test in the weekend to help establish our case, and other people here know that the report from Christchurch engineers got the ground condition wrong. They also said that the occupancy class was such that it was for places that gather over 300 people, and that's just not what happens there. So if you change those two numbers and multiply a figure of 30 for business, for the new building standards, you go from 30 to 50 with one 10-minute calculation.
Okay. Boy, if it's wrong, the cost, as we saw in the CTV building with Christchurch, is terrible. But you are confident, absolutely confident, that this building is safe. Are you recommending it be reopened without any structural alterations?
Definitely. I mean, you can't say any building's safe because you don't know what earthquakes are coming. But what the building's required to do is comply with codes. And if it's under 34% of the new building standard, then it's earthquake prone. But neither the MB or the health and safety people say it should be evacuated in that case. But that's the argument that the chief executive has made. And we're saying that so it shouldn't be closed even if it was 30%, but we're saying, in our expert opinion really, that the building is about 50%. And so the argument is that, well, my proposal was that they put the staff back in, they have take themselves 6 months to get a proper assessment of the deal, and then if there's something to be done, well, it should be done, but closing it is actually unbelievable. It was, I mean, essentially the announcement was made, a few weeks after a new chief executive arrived from Nelson, and that was made on the 9th of April, and the building was closed on the 12th of April. Well, it's just mad, in my opinion.
Bob Simpson, thank you so much. So Bob Simpson just out of that meeting. We'll make some calls to Southland and see what response to what Bob is saying. Absolutely fascinating, because it was a fairly dramatic closure. Bob is saying not necessary. We're about 2.5 minutes away from the news at 6. Just before we go there, this is a case which reads like a Scandinavian murder mystery novel, really. A Danish inventor who fantasised about killing women has been given a life sentence for murdering a Swedish journalist. A court in Copenhagen heard that Peter Madsen killed Kim Wall on board a submarine he'd built himself last year after she'd accepted an invitation to interview him. Absolutely terrible crime. He, of course, vehemently denied it. The jury has said you are guilty. The BBC's Jenny Hill reports on the case, which has gripped Denmark and made headlines around the world.
Kim Wall was last seen heading out of Copenhagen harbour on Peter Madsen's submarine. The journalist planned to interview the inventor, whose projects and stunts had captured the Danish public imagination. But the court was told that Peter Madsen was in fact a psychopath with a taste for sexual violence. Once on board, in what the judge described as a cynically planned murder, he restrained, tortured and killed Miss Wall. He dismembered her body and dumped it at sea. Even the prosecuting lawyer admitted he'd found the trial distressing. Addressing journalists outside the courtroom, Jacob Buch-Jepsen said that while he tried to act professionally, the case had got under his skin. It's not just the brutality of the crime, which has left many Danes feeling profoundly disturbed. Peter Madsen, who stared impassively ahead as the court sentenced him to life in prison, was something of a celebrity. Even his biographer, Thomas Jersing, who's known him for years, said he could never have imagined that the apparently harmless eccentric was in reality a violent killer.
I know that he was a weird person, and I liked the weirdness in him, but I think all the elements that was confusing to me, I just assumed that there was goodness in those parts where there wasn't.
Madsen is expected to appeal. In the meantime, the Danish authorities are preparing to destroy his submarine.
That report from the BBC, 30 seconds away from the news. Lots of feedback in on DHB's Counties Manukau. You would think surely these issues of significant building decline would have been part of numerous conversations over and over with the previous government minister. It seems to me, says Sally Colvert, a culture of budget savings was dominant, and therefore it was only in written form, like on the websites, etc., that this info was placed. A muzzled culture and healthy around spending has kept this info under the radar. That's Sally. Stu says, John, it's the Capital Investment Committee. Guarantee it. We appreciate your feedback. Thank you. It's 6.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The AA is questioning if the new 10-year plan to tackle Auckland's transport issues will go far enough to ease congestion. Today, the government announced $28 billion for roads, rail and cycleways across the city over the next decade. It includes a significant upgrade to Mill Road, a main link in South Auckland, and a new road between the Whangaparaoa Peninsula and Northern Motorway called Penlink, which will cost $200 million. AA spokesman Barney Irvine says there's no detail on how congestion will be affected.
But the big question for us is congestion and what impact this plan is going to have on congestion. Congestion is the number one concern for our members, and the plan in its current form tells us very little about congestion outcomes.
Barney Irvine from the AA. Christchurch ratepayers might have to fork out more than $21 million to make the city's water supply safe so chlorination can be ended. In January, the City Council revealed most of the city's 156 wells were at risk of contamination and had to be temporarily chlorinated. Staff have recommended raising up to half the wells above ground as a long-term solution costing $21.5 million. At a meeting today, the council backed raising the wellheads as the preferred approach. Staff will now assess every well and bring a work timetable to the council next month. As many as 24,000 Vector customers had their identifying information accessed last week. The information has been available due to a vulnerability on its app for reporting power cuts. Vector believes the information accessed includes customers' names, phone numbers and email addresses. No financial or banking information was held in the app. Vector has notified the Privacy Commissioner of the data breach. Officials have confirmed Kim Jong-un will become the first North Korean leader since the Korean War to officially set foot on the south side of the military demarcation line between the two countries. Tomorrow he'll meet the South Korean President Moon Jae-in for an historic summit. From Seoul, the BBC's Laura Bicker has the details.
The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will cross the military demarcation line on the border between the two countries on foot. The two leaders will then walk together to what is known as the Peace House for talks. Mr. Kim will inspect the South Korean Honour Guard and together they will plant a ceremonial tree. The plaque will read, "Here we plant peace and prosperity." It's not known how the two sides will reach an agreement on North Korea's nuclear weapons, but this summit is being seen as a breakthrough after years of building tension on the peninsula.
Laura Bicker in Seoul. A coroner's hearing has been told a man who killed himself in Rimutaka prison showed no signs of being at risk. Jonathan Antipas was 24 when he died in October 2014. Extracts of the diary he kept in prison were read in court, revealing he was thinking of harming himself. However, the then director of Rimutaka prison, Chris Burns, told the coroner an assessment carried out when Jonathan Antipas was remanded in custody raised no concerns. He read part of it to the court.
What are your future plans? He stated that he wants to own his own business as a painter decorator. Have you ever made plans to take your own life or reached the stage where you have actually attempted to take your own life? He stated no. Has someone close to you ever attempted to take their own life? He stated no, I don't think so.
But Chris Burns admitted staff had been told Jonathan Antipas had spoken of killing himself in communications with people outside prison. He said in a perfect world a further risk assessment would have taken place then. A Nelson man sentenced to life in prison for murder today shouted he would be appealing before swearing at the judge and everyone in court. Martin Grant Price, who has a long history of violence, will spend at least 17 years behind bars for the 2016 murder of an itinerant man who lived on a boat. Tracy Neal reports.
The feud between the men was described as petty and childish, but bitterly maintained. Martin Price was sentenced in the High Court in Nelson today to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years for the murder of John Murray Morton. The defence maintained it was a short and flurried assault without a high level of brutality. Justice Dobson did not accept it was anything less than a cruel and violent attack, and Price stabbed and beat Mr Morton, then left him to die. Price was also given a first strike warning. In Nelson, Tracy Neal.
A scandal involving a yoga program in the Papua New Guinea capital of Port Moresby has triggered a criminal investigation. The governor of Port Moresby is being investigated by anti-corruption police after it was revealed he was paying $1.2 million a year to a yoga company run by a woman said to be his girlfriend. The ABC's Eric Torchek reports.
Port Moresby's active city program of walks and yoga lessons has a large following, but revelations from inside City Hall about its cost, $100,000 Australian dollars a month, have shocked residents. The money's going to a company owned by Malaysian yoga teacher Fazila Bazari. She's alleged to be the partner of the city's governor, but denies the relationship and any misuse of the money. An opposition MP says her company was illegally registered, and now anti-corruption police are investigating the contract.
Eric Torchek in Port Moresby. It's 6:05. Sport, and Laurie Daly has confirmed he's met with New Zealand Rugby League officials to discuss the Kiwis' coaching role. Daly is the fourth high-profile coach to meet with New Zealand officials after David Kidwell was axed in February, following the team's leaving last year's World Cup in the quarter-finals. Daly, the former New South Wales State of Origin coach, has confirmed to Australian media he was in New Zealand this week to discuss the role. The Kiwis next play England in June, meaning the new coach is likely to be announced in the next 2 months. A long-awaited report into corruption in tennis says a tsunami of match fixing is plaguing lower-level events, but the independent review panel found no evidence of a cover-up by governing bodies. The report also shows no evidence of top-level players being implicated, as the BBC's Joe Wilson reports.
It does not give any specific details of players or matches which have been fixed. The review said that was not part of its remit, but it does say very clearly that corruption has, quote, taken root in professional tennis, particularly at the lower levels of the game. It says there are too many meaningless matches, thousands of tennis professionals trying and failing to make a living out of the game with prize money, and those are the players which may be tempted into corruption.
Joe Wilson reporting. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, William Dart celebrates a celebration of the music of the late Mahinarangi Toka. There's a window on the world of communication. It's never been easier. It seems it's never been easier to be misunderstood. And Peggy Revell is on the line from Canada, which has been dealing with on-road and off-road horror recently, while folk in the provinces are putting their hopes in a new growth industry: cannabis.
And I drop in tonight's at 10. We'll be talking to people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. We'll have an eye on books, music and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mainly fine, but a few light showers tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Mostly fine, but isolated showers about Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson, fine. Bulla and Westland mainly fine today. A few showers tomorrow, turning to rain later in the day. Canterbury fine today. Scattered rain developing south of Christchurch tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland mainly fine. Scattered rain developing tomorrow morning, turning to showers, possibly heavy and thundery with hail from evening. Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. $28 billion will be spent over the next decade on efforts to get Aucklanders moving around the country's largest city and home to 1 in 3 New Zealanders faster. The majority comes from the Land Transport Fund, as well as some from a fuel tax, private finance and tolls. And what it's buying is 2 new major link roads, new light rail from the city going south and west, and lots of new bus improvements. Mayor Phil Goff says the plan will go a long way to ease congestion.
I welcome this package because I believe it is a balanced package. It does not ignore the immediate needs of population growth and the fact that our roads are choked. So it allows for investment in areas like Mill Road, which I know well, Minister, because I used to live on it and I go across it each day. It allows for Penlink, it allows for traffic corridor improvements such as Lake Road, Matakana Link Road, for those of you that come from the north, and areas like Lincoln Road. But it is also totally transformational in understanding that no global city can cope with the increase in population number by simply building more roads. We've got to do much, much more than that. And this package is transformational in heavy rail with a 3rd main trunk line that will allow an express route from the south into the city. I travelled on that line yesterday, and at 6:30 in the morning those carriages were full in peak hour. It allows for electrification to Pukekohe, it allows for new electric trains. It provides hugely for our buses. New busways, it allows us to bring forward stages 2, 3 and 4 of the Eastern Busway from Panmure to Botany. That's really important. It allows for new bus lanes so that buses aren't clogged in the same traffic that's holding everybody else up. It allows for new bus infrastructure to get in and out of the city centre. It allows for ferry development, a new ferry terminal in town to allow those folk coming from all over the city to more easily get into the city. It allows for a new mass transit system, which is light rail, which will ultimately cover the whole of the city, but of course it has to be done in stages.
In stages, and that is important. That is the Mayor's take on the plan. But we noticed almost all of that public transport infrastructure being built over the next decade is south of the Harbour Bridge in terms of new projects. All the North Shore will get over the next decade is an extension of the Northern Busway to Silversdale. It was done in stages, and the North Shore's big stage is going to take a lot longer than that. So Zach Fleming went to ask locals what they think.
If everything goes to plan, Auckland will have light rail going west and south in max 10 years, on top of the heavy rail that already goes east. But for the North Shore,
there's nothing here at all, and it's frustrating because it's gridlocked.
Locals today repeatedly told us they felt left out. Where's their rail? Where's their big investment?
ATAP doesn't do enough for those living north of the Harbour Bridge.
Danielle Grant is the Deputy Chair of the Kaipātiki Local Board, which covers the suburbs right on the southern edge of the shore.
Our community are stuck in congestion. We would like to see the second harbour crossing prioritised, which would make the biggest improvement for all of the north.
But currently it's not earmarked to be finished until the mid-2030s, and by then there could be close to 100,000 more people living on the North Shore. The mid-2030s is around 15 years sooner than the last Auckland Transport Plan, but people on the shore we spoke to today say it's still not good enough.
There are a lot of people that need transport. I notice the buses are always full, even during the day.
Because we need it now, and in 30 years' time they're going to put something in place that's going to be fine for now, but what's it going to be like in 30 years' time? It's just going to be a nightmare. We're not going to be able to get anywhere, and it's stopping people from moving to the shore because nobody wants to have to fight their way through that.
Great to see investment. I want to use public transport, and I do where I can, but yeah, it does just feel like it's not actually as fit for purpose as it could be.
And with campaigning in the Northcote by-election well underway, Upper Harbour MP Paula Bennett says a new harbour crossing is hot on the lips of constituents she's speaking with too.
We're certainly coming under pressure as we're going around and talking to people that they'd like that brought forward a bit. And I know, talking to Dan Bidwell, our candidate in Northcote, he's already raised it with me a number of times and just said, what can we do about it? Well, I don't think Labour's even listening to them. So it's just, yet again, it feels like that the North Shore are expected to fund either other parts of Auckland and see no rewards for what they're actually spending their money on.
But North Shore Ward Councillor Richard Hills says there's little new major public transport infrastructure because none is needed just yet. He lives on the North Shore in Glenfield.
I get the bus in the morning. It takes me about 28 minutes to the city. So at the moment we can continue to increase the services there, but you wouldn't need a rapid transport route just yet, and plus we wouldn't have the billions for it.
It is all down to money, but he says the Skypath, more ferry sailings, a new bus interchange and the extension of the Northern Busway will be enough to carry the North Shore over until the second harbour crossing is built in around 15 years' time.
In general there is a lot there, just no massive sort of motorway or new train cutting through Glenfield and Beachhaven in the first decade.
And the transport plan says it will come with light rail to the North Shore. So for those on the North Shore, the message is be patient. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Zach Fleming and our cameraman Nick Monroe on that story. Let's go to this. Gamesmanship, what is it when Macron and Trump get together? After a day of repeated handshakes and cozying up at the White House, the French President Emmanuel Macron has taken the gloves off. During a rare address to the US Congress during his first state visit, Mr Macron took pointed aim at many of President Donald Trump's policies. It was very pointed amongst, a crowd that is pretty split. Lots of them don't like Trump, lots of them rely on Trump. And there was no hint it was coming. The BBC's John Sopel has been covering the visit and sent this report.
The social high point of a state visit is the White House banquet. And last night, once again, that entente, oh so cordial, between the odd couple of global politics was on show again.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the French Republic.
Today in Congress, the French President had a twinkle in his eye.
It's 1778. The French philosopher Voltaire and Benjamin Franklin met in Paris. John Adams tells the story that after they had shaken hands, they embraced each other by hugging one another in their arms and kissing each other's cheeks. It can remind you something.
But then something unexpected, a full-on assault of virtually every policy that Donald Trump holds dear. Forget bromance, this was bromide. First, the US president's isolationist America First policies.
We can choose isolationism, withdrawal, and nationalism. This is an option. But closing the door to the word will not stop the evolution of the word. It will not douse, but inflame the fears of our citizens.
And on free trade, support for multilateral institutions, inequality, science, the Iran nuclear deal, they were an Atlantic Ocean apart. Then the French president rounded on Donald Trump over climate change. Forget Make America Great Again, it was time to make the Earth great again.
By polluting the oceans, not mitigating CO2 emissions, and destroying our biodiversity, we are killing our planet. Let us face it, there is no planet B.
This was an audacious speech. On the floor of Congress, where the US president delivers the State of the Union address, the keynote moment of the political year, a foreign visitor used his platform to lambast his host's policies, but with a smile and bonhomie. This was a hugely significant speech by Emmanuel Macron, not just because of the attack it contained on Donald Trump's policies, but because it showed the French leader setting himself up as the man with the alternative vision to the US president, and all the time maintaining that bonhomie with him. That's quite a political feat.
John Sopel there from Washington. John is with the BBC, of course. A woman whose son killed himself in prison has closely questioned senior corrections staff about his treatment, saying she wants procedures tightened up for at-risk prisoners to avoid anyone else dying in jail. An inquest is being held at the Coroner's Court in Wellington into the death of Jonathan Antipas at Rimutaka Prison in October 2014. Anne-Marie May was there and she filed this report.
Jonathan Antipas was remanded in custody following his arrest in August 2014 on several charges, including the kidnap of his former partner and 5-year-old son at gunpoint. Extracts from the 24-year-old's diary read to the coroner's court revealed he was thinking of harming himself. His mother, Denise Purahi, said the family are concerned the police overcharged Mr Antipas and being remanded in custody left him feeling crushed. She read to the court from a letter she sent the police inquest officer about that.
We've never known Johnny to be so angry, so hurt and so distressed. In his diary, Johnny says he was set up. He defends his charges, which he feels were unjust. He felt his imprisonment was unjust, especially the kidnapping, burglary and car theft charges. Getting bail was so important to him, but the bail was denied.
The then director of Rimutaka Prison, Chris Burns, told the coroner that an assessment was carried out when Jonathan Antipas was remanded in custody and it raised no concerns about his health. He read parts of the assessment notes to the court.
What are your future plans? He stated that he wants to own his own business as a painter decorator. Have you ever made plans to take your own life or reached the stage where you have actually attempted to take your own life? He stated no. Has someone close to you ever attempted to take their own life? He stated no, I don't think so.
Chris Burns said further assessments took place each time Jonathan Antipas returned to prison from court appearances, and he exhibited no behaviours which would have raised alarm. He admitted that staff had been told Mr Antipas had spoken of killing himself in communications with people outside prison, and in a perfect world, good practice would have been for an at-risk assessment to be conducted at that stage. That led to this exchange with Coroner Ryan.
Has anything been changed in the procedures following Jonathan's death to ensure that best practice is followed?
My understanding was that information was shared with staff that when they have any concerns at all, that they default to conduct an at-risk assessment.
The coroner indicated he may recommend changes to the process that takes place when officers are made aware a prisoner has threatened to self-harm. The inquest will continue tomorrow. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
After years of investigations into a string of cold case rapes and murders, the police in California have arrested one of their own. 72-year-old former police officer Joseph D'Angelo from Sacramento is being held on 2 counts of murder. But the police believe he could be responsible for more than 50 rapes and 12 killings in different parts of California between 1976 and 1986. The crimes were blamed on the so-called Golden State Killer. With more, here's the BBC's James Cook.
Joseph James D'Angelo, the man police say terrorised California while serving as an officer of the law himself. After decades of frustration for detectives, they found the suspect under their noses in the state capital.
For over 40 years, countless victims have waited for justice. Over these years, hundreds of individuals have sought justice for these victims and their families.
The rapist moved into Contra Costa County in October, striking 3 times in just over 3 weeks.
More than 175 crimes in the 70s and 80s have been linked to the Golden State Killer, including 12 murders and 51 rapes.
She was awakened while being blindfolded. She never saw her assailant.
The crime spree started in Sacramento before spreading to the San Francisco area and then Central and Southern California. It took years before investigators could confirm that the crimes were linked. Advances in science eventually led detectives to the former police officer, now 72 years old and the father of grown-up children. His arrest apparently came as a complete surprise.
Over the last few days, as information started to point towards this individual, we started some surveillance. We were able to get some discarded DNA, and we were able to confirm what we thought we already knew, that we had our man.
For the families of victims, although the pain endures, there is now some satisfaction.
To the entire reservoir of victims out there, my sadness is with you. For the 51 ladies who were brutally raped in this crime scene, sleep better tonight. He isn't coming through the window.
Prosecutors are now beginning to file charges against Joseph D'Angelo. If convicted, he could face the death penalty.
That report from James Cook from the BBC. Facebook's profits have soared in the first financial quarter despite the Cambridge Analytica data breach scandal. Revenue jumped 49% to more than $11 billion. But experts warn the social media platform could still take a financial hit. This report from Reuters.
Facebook out with another stellar earnings report in the first quarter, despite facing its biggest challenge ever from a major data breach scandal. On Wednesday, the social media giant beat estimates with $11.8 billion in revenue, up 50% from the same period last year. That helped the shares rise about 4% in after-hours trading. Facebook and its CEO Mark Zuckerberg have been under the gun since mid-March, when political firm Cambridge Analytica was found to have used data from millions of users to help President Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Reuters correspondent David Ingram.
It's possible that we're going to see a bigger hit to Facebook from this privacy scandal in the second quarter, the quarter that's happening now, and that we'll see results from in 3 months. So the Cambridge Analytica scandal came pretty late in the first quarter for it to have a big impact on the results from that quarter.
Zuckerberg in the earnings statement said, quote, "Despite facing important challenges, our community and business are off to a strong start in 2018. We're taking a broader view of our responsibility and investing to make sure our services are used for good." But there are also some signs that Facebook could face some challenges on cost going forward as it beefs up its staff to help police the site.
The employee headcount rose 48% year over year, which is a huge number. And when you hire someone, that expense usually continues for some period of time. And so there's some built-in growth in Facebook's cost here that is going to be a question for a lot of analysts.
As of the end of March, Facebook had nearly 28,000 employees. Monthly active users, 2.2 billion.
Isn't that an extraordinary figure? That report from Jane Lanhilly from Reuters. There have been large demonstrations across Germany against what is feared is a growing tide of anti-Semitism. The rallies have been held in response to mobile phone footage posted on social media which shows 2 men in Jewish skull caps or kippah being attacked by 3 youths. Thousands took to the streets in solidarity with the Jewish community. This report from the BBC's Libo De Seco.
Standing together side by side, protesting against anti-Semitism. Thousands of people of various faiths on the streets of Berlin wearing the Jewish skull cap, the kippah.
It is important that today so many Berliners have paved the way by going out into the street wearing a kippah to say that anti-Semitism has no place in our city.
It's in response to an assault on 2 young men wearing kippahs in Berlin last week. The attacker was filmed shouting anti-Semitic abuse. Here's what one of the victims had to say.
I was in Israel some days ago and I received the kippah as a present from a friend. When he gave it to me, he said I should not go outside with the kippah on in Berlin because it was not safe. And at the time I thought this was wrong and that it was nonsense.
There's been widespread condemnation of the attack with demonstrations in a number of towns.
We as Christians have a very special relationship to Judaism. Anti-Semitic assaults are just not on.
Everyone has the right to show their religion, and this is part of Germany.
Many Jewish groups have raised concerns about the rise in anti-Semitic incidents. One community leader even advised people to avoid wearing the kippah in big cities. Germany's leader Angela Merkel says her government will respond with full force against anti-Semitism. But it may well take more to make ordinary Jewish people feel safe expressing their faith in everyday life.
Able to Seco with that report from the BBC. A couple of minutes left on the programme before 6:30 and a lot of feedback coming in on Auckland transport. Some of you not remotely interested in it. This person says, I don't want to pay for Auckland's trams. But lots of people are saying, this seems pretty good to us. Paula Bennett and Daniel Grant, chair of the Kaipatiki local board, both asked for a new harbour crossing for people on the North Shore sick of being stuck in congestion. Unfortunately, today's announcement will deliver one in the form of Skypath. Says one person, travelling on sea makes the most sense for Auckland, but isn't possible for many people who live inland, so ferries are by far the best option for the shore. Says Beth, hi John, North Shore has a great bus route. Run more buses. The new Auckland transport plan sounds great. Paula Bennett should get out of her car and take a bus, says Hamish from Welly, admittedly. Good on you, Hamish. It's nice to have someone from Wellington not saying, well, bloody old Auckland, we don't care about your transport. Off you go. Take your transport and go away. So good on you, Hamish. You're very welcome. Someone's asking, is Tegel chicken going to remain halal? I don't know the answer to that question. I didn't know. I don't know whether they are or not. And someone's saying you can't blame the taxi company. A lot of comments coming in from people inside the health system about the kind of reporting that takes place. In other words, is bad news referred up by DHBs? Does it make its way up through the hospital? Does it get to the boards? Do the boards pass it on to the ministry? Do the ministry pass it on to the minister? And lots of people are suggesting impediments, blocks, and the see no evil, hear no evil kind of attitude towards bad news has been a feature of life in the ministry. This is an investigation that Checkpoint is working on. What exactly have been the assessments? How robust have they been? And we will have that for you in the not too distant future. In the more immediate future, though, we've got The Sting. That is Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you for joining us on your radio, on your TV, online, or however you chose to be with us. We are delighted to have the pleasure of your company. We'll leave you with James Milne, aka Lawrence Arabia, and we'll be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Automobile Association says Auckland's transport plan does not have enough detail about how it will ease congestion. Christchurch City Council has asked its staff to come back next month with a work plan for raising wells to make the city's water supply safe. Up to 24,000 Vector customers who used an app to report power cuts had their identifying information accessed last week. And an Auckland taxi company says the family of a man with dementia did not give them enough information to help find where they dropped him off. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I kiss the sleep out of your waking hours.
In this week's New Horizons, I'm privileged to be able to share some of the warmth and aroa that broke forth from Love Me As I Am, Auckland Art Festival's tribute to the late songwriter Mahina Rangitoka.
Not enough to